Hey guys, I'm Leanne Jamira.
And I'm Natalie Bensavanga, and this is Heating Up. This is the show that explores the intersection between the foods that we love to make and the conversations that we need to be having around climate change and social justice.
So sit back and relax while we make comfort foods that are good for you and good for the planet. So Natalie, what do we have today?
Okay, I thought today we would do something a little bit different because we've been doing a lot of comfort foods on this show, and
Yeah.
I think people forget that a salad can actually be comforting. And the thing that I think makes this salad so comforting is the amazing tahini dressing that we're going to toss all of our veggies with, and I love to use quinoa. Quinoa is like
It's a superfood, right?
It's like we knew. It's a complete protein. It is so healthy for you, and I'm just obsessed with it and everything, so it's a great addition to this. I know, and it has that real nutty, I like
Yeah, it
the red
does.
quinoa. It has that real nutty sort of flavor to it. So let's start with some of our veggies. Do you want to start cutting some up while I'm...
I can totally
You
do
can
that.
do the cutting, right?
I can do it poorly.
You can.
That's all right.
It's not poor. You're fantastic. So what I love about this recipe is I like to use sturdy greens for this, which is the dino kale. Plus, I just like to say that. And our friend of the show, Dr. Natalie Gentili, who's a plant-based doctor in the city, she gave me a little fun facts around the dino kale, and I didn't memorize all this, so you're going to see me reading off this page. So it's an excellent source of iron. Okay, and it's best absorbed when combined with foods high in vitamin C. And of course, we've got lemon on the table here. Carrots have vitamin C. So we are ready to roll with the absorption. And what I love about this dressing, right, I said it was comforting. It's super healthy for you too. So tahini is an excellent source of healthy fats, but also, and I didn't know this, and I love learning new facts, it's a good source of copper. So when you combine that with the iron in the dino kale, okay, it can help with your iron absorption. So it actually makes the nutrients in your body actually get to where they need to go. See, this stuff, like, it like turns me on. Like, it excites me. Like, I'm just like, oh, dino kale, this is amazing. Like, who knew?
I didn't even know that as humans we consumed copper.
We're learning all kinds of new things on today's show. Okay.
Sorry to expose myself.
No,
but-
I didn't. Believe me, that's amazing to know. And then apple cider vinegar, which
I love.
I'm a huge fan of. I think people sometimes get a little freaked out by it because of its like strong vinegary smell. But when you combine it with all of the other ingredients for our dressing, it really mellows and just gives it like a nice tang.
And what I used to do with apple cider vinegar?
What?
Take shots every morning of it.
I can't do that.
So I love it.
I don't even know how you do that. I can't do that. I was never good at shots in general, but you're too young to be talking about shots, so that we're going to skip that
Right, I don't know what a
conversation.
shot is.
Okay, thank you. All right, your mom might be watching, so it's fine. It's fine. Okay, so what do we love about apple cider vinegar? It is helpful in combating insulin resistance, which leads to diabetes, so it can help control your blood sugar levels. Isn't that cool? I didn't know that.
I didn't know that
I
either.
love learning. And you know what's so crazy? I think when you start eating more plants, you become like super intuitive about like things that might be good to do together.
Yeah. Honestly, I will say as well, like,
Yeah.
when I started eating more plant-based, that was because I started reading way more about the medicinal properties of food.
Okay.
And that was what interested me, was learning like, wow, I'm feeling these low energy levels because I'm not having enough iron.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
I'm not having enough vitamin C, and that's why I'm getting colds every 2 weeks.
Well, and what's interesting
So-
when you're eating plant-based too, it's like your body really starts to figure itself out a little bit when you're eating a lot of plants. So you really do, I think, become super in tune.
And that's
Like,
something
it's
very
for real.
important as well. Listen to your body.
Yeah.
And eat what your body's asking you for.
Absolutely.
Some days, your body is going to be asking you for a nice dino kale salad.
That's right.
And then that day, you watch this video.
That's right.
So
And then you can
Natalie,
enjoy it.
how do we assemble this salad?
Okay, before we do that, do you know what this is? The before and after. I'm playing with it right now.
Tempeh.
Yes. So this is just tempeh, like just in its non-fancy form, which is fermented soybeans, which we've used on the show before. And this is my secret spice blend. I can't
I
even get it
try
out
it?
because I'm so excited. Of course. And you know, our friend Sarah, who you haven't seen because she's behind the scenes of the show doing amazing things for us, she actually thought that these kind of were like croutons.
They are a little
Which
bit.
I didn't really think about that, but she's totally right. And I always like it because it adds that crunch. But this is your protein source. This is like a protein packed. You got protein, you got protein, you got protein.
And I will say, I love having nuts on my salad.
And it
And
has a
that's
real
sort of
nutty.
how it feels.
Yeah. So I'm obsessed. And what you do is you basically add the spices over here, which is paprika, turmeric, nutritional yeast, onion powder, garlic powder, salt, pepper, a little bit of olive oil or veggie broth if you want to keep it oil-free, saute it up, and it turns into that, and it's going to go on top of our salad. So when we're done chopping all of these goodies, we're just going to assemble, and really then it's just a party, right?
Right.
So that's where we're at. So let's get this thing going. So let's keep chopping, and let's get the sauce going.
Let's get to it.
All right.
Okay, this smells amazing.
Yes.
My mouth is watering.
Yes.
How long before we eat this?
Oh, like literally 2 minutes. This is one of those recipes, once again, you're tired, you come home, this takes 10 minutes because literally it can all be made while the quinoa is cooking, and that takes about 10 to 15 minutes. Done. So let's go.
I'm sensing a pattern with you, and
I like to
time limits on recipes.
you know, during the week, I mean, we all like these big, long, elaborate meals, but I mean, who's got time for it during the week? I know I
Yeah.
don't. Okay, so we're gonna add all our ingredients before she is like so ready with the dressing. She's like ready to go. Okay.
Sorry guys, I need
Here
to
we go.
open
We pour it in the quinoa.
it. Should we toss it?
At the end we will, yeah. We got some carrots, we got our scallions. I love celery. We got our croutons, our unofficial croutons, as Sarah said.
Our tempeh.
Our tempeh. And now, go for it.
The grand
She's so
finale.
excited, yes. Then there's a little salt and pepper here too, just in case you want to re-season, but I don't think you're going to need to.
Oh.
Look at how creamy and cheesy and amazing and delightful that looks. And you can't, I know we don't have smell-o-vision. That's something we need to work on, but it smells insane. And this is literally one of my favorite salads because it is comforting because it's so creamy and delicious. And what I love about using the dino kale, another reason, you can leave this in the fridge for a couple of days and it'll still like be hearty. Whereas if you use other types of greens, they're just not that hearty and then they get real soggy and kind of gross. So it really
I
is.
haven't heard a thing you've said. I've just been watching this salad.
It's all right. No one listens
My
to me.
eyes
It's fine.
cannot get taken off of it.
Doesn't that look amazing?
Yeah.
I'm so excited for our dinner guests tonight to try this, but I feel like for quality assurance purposes, we should at least each take a little taste with our fingers, just, you know, one little lettuce leaf won't hurt anybody, and get that nice and mixed in. I'm obsessed with the way
Okay,
this smells.
let me
Okay,
get
I
the
know,
forks.
you're ready, you're ready.
Let me get the fork.
Okay. All right, she's back. Here we go. Ready, Freddie? All right.
I'm gonna get this all over my face.
Oh yeah,
I don't
this
care.
is how we do it.
Yeah. Yep.
Now, if you really want to go crazy, sometimes I add vegan cheese,
Yeah.
and then it's kind of over the top. But what do you think?
I just need a moment of silence and another bite.
Okay.
And I
Before
can-
we eat all of it, let's go plate it up for dinner. Let's
All
get
right.
ready.
Let me put that back, even though that's unsanitary.
All right. We'll see you soon, guys.
Hi you guys, so we are going to have this dino kale salad that Natalie put together for us with Summer Lee, the representative for the 34th district of the city and suburbs of Pittsburgh. And I'm gonna give it to Summer to introduce herself.
Yeah, thank you all for having me.
Oh,
and the
of
salad
course.
looks awesome.
while you're talking.
No,
we
right
should
now.
do that, right? Because I
Yes,
would love to
yes.
get right into it. But no, thanks for having me. Yeah, I've been a rep for the last 2 years. This is my third, so it's been
Wow.
a journey. Yeah.
3 already.
Yeah, well, it's going into the
Going
third.
to the-
I almost don't
God.
count last year because I did my first year, and then my second year was during the pandemic.
What was that like?
During the pandemic,
Yeah.
it was bonkers.
fun as it can be,
No,
right?
it was no. You know what? It was. We use the word unprecedented too much, but it was absolutely unprecedented. We were like we were just getting our footing and really just like learning how to govern, how to run an office, how to interact with our constituents and help our constituents, and then bow, pandemic hits and we're having to like readjust everything. So it has absolutely been an experience.
What
Yeah.
made you, first of all, tell everybody a little bit about your background and like what made you actually decide to take the plunge and run for office? Because it's a big deal to do this. I don't think people
It
understand.
becomes less and less a deal.
We'll get into that too.
Yeah, right. No, so I had come back home. I went off to law school, went off to school, and I come back home, and I had this law degree, and I was looking at just all the things going on in the world, like cyclical racism, and really conceptualizing that, right? Really realizing how all of these things are interconnected. And I so infrequently saw anyone who talked about it that way, right? Who talked about issues plaguing like Black and brown and poor people by starting at the root, right? Sometimes you'll hear people talk about, well, you know, there's gun violence, and gun violence exists on its own, but they don't talk about, you know, the schools. Or schools exist on their own, and they don't talk about...
Everything's siloed.
Absolutely. And that's intentional. But when you really, like, you know, frame back, when you look back, and you're like, wow, well, if you really think about it, well, this government action caused this, right? Black and brown people are more likely to live in communities with underfunded schools because of their own policies, right? Because of redlining or loan policies or, you know, all of these different things that really kept folks in certain communities or kept them out of certain communities. But then when you look at those communities, now you kind of see why Black and brown folks and poor folks are more likely to live by environmental hazards. And if you live by an environmental hazard, you are more likely to miss school because you're sick. You're more likely to have outcomes that are not as good as your counterparts who live in areas with clean air and clean water. And that funnels you directly into the incarceral system, and really just seeing how all of these things are connected and really just trying to figure out, well, how do you talk about this in a way that moves people who have influence? So that's really why I wanted to run, because I wanted to talk about this more. I wanted to introduce this interconnectivity, this kind of cyclical racism to folks who maybe didn't know about it, and really just see how far we can take it and how much we can amplify it before people in power really started to see it that way.
And I have to say, what I've always admired about you, of course, yes, please eat, manjas, my grandmother would say manja. What I've always really admired about you is how you frame conversations and issues, because you and I have had conversations before where I think part of the problem sometimes is people, they work within a framework that's preset in how we discuss things. So it's almost like you're setting yourself up for failure in the way that you talk about it because you're within someone else's framework. And you really seem to take that framework and turn it on its head and put it out there in a way that gets people to think about an issue differently. Was that intentional?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you think about the people who drive the narrative, who drive conversations, they're rarely people who are most impacted. It's rarely the people who are living out the policy implications. It's rarely the people who are being oppressed, the people who are marginalized. It's always people who are further and further and furthest away from the problem. And when you think about how that impacts us on the policy level, of how it impacts us really just on the micro level of just the simple thing of how do we talk about an issue?
Exactly.
How do we view an issue? Who's being centered in the conversation? How are we elevating that perspective? How are we giving how are we lending credibility to that perspective? And that's really what like everything that we've been trying to do has been about. And when you do that, like it's just subtle like shifts in the way that we view power, the way that we view who should be in power, the way that we view who is an expert, who is credible to talk about their own experiences, right? Do you have to have a PhD? Do you have to have a suit on to talk about environmental racism? Or could you be the person who lives next to the steel mill who has COPD and never smokes cigarettes, right? Or you some sort of expert? And just like shifting it to center those folks in the narrative has like done, it's just created an entire new world of possibilities in how we are organizing and how we advocate and how we are really just viewing people and the power and the influence that they have.
You know, that's really interesting that you bring that up, because I think like I've never really heard somebody phrase it that way, but the way that we've allowed the people telling the stories of what's going on to be people that aren't actually a part of the story, like they're separated from the story. And something that I've always noticed as I'm reading about environmental issues, like just recently I went down a rabbit hole of reading about the carceral system and how attached it is to environmental racism and environmental injustice. And I didn't know at all. And there was like this one prison in California that like in the last 20 years has been fined like 6 times for hundreds of thousands of dollars, which it doesn't even dent the amount of money that they have, but because their prisoners are being exposed to raw sewage, toxic water, toxic air, all of them. They say, prisoners will be interviewed from, there's another prison in Pennsylvania that has similar issues, and they'll be interviewed and they'll be like, I'm not even worried to, I don't even care anymore about being in prison and living out my sentence. I'm worried that I won't survive to get out and see my family. And I didn't know that all of those things were so interconnected. And I think one of the things that we've lost, and the reason why there's been so much inaction and why, as communities and as a population, we feel so detached to, actually solving things, is because the people talking about it are people who aren't affected, people who are rich and powerful, and people who are telling us, it's fine, we can come to a compromise and we can figure it out. And really, if you listen to somebody who's there living it is life or death.
And it's over there.
Yeah,
it's over there. It's
death.
not impacting you directly, right?
Yeah.
So then it's you can turn your blinders on, so to speak. And I think that we've done a really good way of sort of, once again, framing and talking about these things to make it about the other and not about ourselves, when it's really impacting all of us. So when you were running, first of all, did you think you were going to win? Did you go in with that mindset, or was this more I just want to see what I can do? Or was it I'm here to win?
Oh, we were here to win.
I love it. I love that.
Absolutely.
I love that. That's why you're here.
Exactly.
And then two, when you were running with that mindset, what were some of the issues that you really brought to the people and talked directly to the people about that you think really hooked them on, I want to vote for her?
Oh, that's such a hard question. I don't know. I feel like a broken record so often because I'm not kidding you all. I say the same thing all the time, over and over and over and over and over and over, right? Even on my campaign, I talked about cyclical racism. And I did. I talked about that. I talked about that.
It exists.
It exists.
Still going on.
But you know what? Yeah, you have to say it.
Yeah.
But also, if you don't understand something, you can't dismantle it. You can't address or you can't address something if you just don't understand it.
Right.
And if you don't understand how it plays out in your day-to-day lives. When we were running back in 2018, we had a couple big issues going on in our region, right? So we had the school district, which was, huge galvanizing issue because in our area, so I represent, 12 communities that kind of were forced into consolidation to form one school district. And that was, some black areas and some white areas. And at one point, actually, when I graduated, it was about 50-50. It's not anymore because of white flight and various things, right? But at the time that we were running, so we had a criminal justice issue in the school district.
Right.
Police officers, absolutely. Police officers, brutalizing kids, teachers, security guards. Our school district, Woodland Hills, was top 10 in the nation for disproportionately arresting and punishing Black and brown kids and kids with disabilities. At the same time, there were reports coming out about our environmental condition in the area and the school district, right? So we also find out that a purported 35% of the kids in the district had asthma. And then we start to talk about, well, why do they have asthma? And that's when we start to get into the air quality and realizing that in the Mon Valley, on any given day, we have amongst the worst air quality in the country.
Yeah.
And couple that with, at that very time that we're about to run, there was a proposal for a fracking well to come to our steel mill. So we already have one of the major polluters, not just in the region, but in the country. And then they were gonna put a fracking well. They wanted to put a fracking well on top of that. And it just really put a spotlight on the conditions that Black and brown and poor people are expected to live through, that we're always expected to be sacrificial lambs, even as our kids are literally dying, as our kids are literally, because of the conditions created by industry, the illnesses that cause them to miss school or, misbehave in school, that contributes to the traumas, right? Even as we're living through that, we're still expected to sacrifice even more. So when we knocked on doors, that's what we talked about. We just talked about it like that, and it really connected every parts of our district, whether you were in a suburban part or the urban parts of the district, whether you're in a Black neighborhood or white neighborhood, whether you're in the poor parts or the rich parts. Nobody wanted the fracking well. You know what? And nobody wanted the school district to fail because they realized that our liberation is connected. And that's how we talked about that. If the air quality is bad because industry and government is abusing the Black people of Braddock, do you think it stops at the Forest Hills borderline?
Yeah.
That's right.
Do you think that poor air quality recognizes geopolitical boundaries? It doesn't. And that's what we talked about. And that resonated with people. And we were honest and told the truth. And
so it really came down in my mind with all of the incredible things you just said, this idea of collective liberation.
part of what makes us stronger, part of our progressive movement is how do we lift people as we're climbing? How are we educating folks? How are we informing? How are we filling in gaps at the same time? So that we're helping people be more discerning voters, being more discerning neighbors, and really empowering them to change the system. What I tell people all the time is like, I'm only as powerful as you are. I represent 60,000 people. I am one of 203. I am not the governor. I am not the president. And even if you were, we still have a system of checks and balances, right? And that does not absolve us of our responsibility to go and fight, like Kale. It doesn't absolve us of the need to communicate, to innovate, to do all those things, right? We got to do all that. We do. We absolutely do. But we also have to recognize the barriers, not because we're using them as excuses. We have to recognize the barriers so that we recognize what we need to build to tear them down. So that's real. Like that's so real. But when we're talking to like the voters, when I'm talking to constituents, I also tell them like, you have power. I am not a king or queen. I'm a tool. I'm one of the tools in your toolkit, our toolkit. Like I'm not the toolkit. and that's like an important perspective because it really helps them to realize, use me. You know? I don't know everything. I'm not an expert on everything. I'm not an expert on environmental justice. Right. I am an expert on my experience, my perspective, and how me and folks who I know have navigated, right? I have access to experts. I have access to whether it's a community expert, my constituents, you all, you know, or the academic folks. It's the same with everything, right? I'm not an expert on agriculture. You know, but there are some experts. What we do is when we learn something, we bring it back. And when our community knows something, they should bring it too. So it's a two-way exchange. And that's what we call co-governing instead of just like a one-way accountability mechanism. Because we also have to kind of disabuse ourselves of this idea that accountability goes one way in a civic or in a democratic kind of structure. It's not the case. Your responsibility to our country, our system, our liberation does not begin and end with the vote. Right. It just doesn't. It begins and ends with organizing, with running sometimes, with replacing, with educating, with doing all these different things. But it's not just the vote. So we all kind of have to engage in this system.
So when we're talking about the systems that are linked, and we're talking about how sometimes the people that are speaking about these systems aren't actually being oppressed or marginalized by them, how do we explain that in terms of our economic system with capitalism? And does it intersect with any of these other systems of oppression that we've discussed?
Definitely. I think that's kind of the crux of environmental racism, right? As in not just environmental justice, but environmental racism, acknowledging that Black and brown people are more likely to be harmed by environmental degradation. They're more likely to live in proximity to environmental degradation and polluters. And that's not just Black and brown people of America, that's Black and brown people of the global South, right? The entire world, more likely to be climate refugees. When we kind of think about, even as we consider environmental justice here in Pittsburgh and Mon Valley in our region, why are certain communities able or allowed to kind of be sacrificial lambs over others, right? That's what racial capitalism is, right? It's this acknowledgement that racism and capitalism are inextricably linked. You know, one class of people are advantaged to the disadvantage of another class, right? So Black people, brown people in our society are often the workhorses, right? We are often the communities that folks make profits off of. But when we're talking about environmental justice, would U.S. Steel or any other industry, would they be allowed to run unfettered the way that they are, to operate the way that they are, if it were not going to be Black and brown people who are harmed by it? If it were not Black and brown people who we are making a profit of, right? I think the answer will be no. And I think that if we can address that and put that with everything, right? Would this system operate the way it would if it were not a profit at the expense of Black and brown people? Environmental justice and environmental racism explores that. So I always end with, or I kind of always say, you cannot be for environmental justice if you are not anti-racist. You cannot be for environmental justice if you are not anti-racist. If you are anti-racist, that's the only way that you can tackle environmental racism and thus climate change.
Yeah, because really racism is just, as an ideology, is just an excuse for rationalizing that there's certain people that are disposable, or as you were saying, like certain communities that are disposable and make you feel okay that you're having your iPhone that's mined.
Yeah.
And
It's a profit model, right?
Yeah.
It's a profit model, and the way that we justify it is by saying that, well, there are some people who are inferior, there are some folks who are on the lower end of the caste system, so if we just have to make our disgusting profit, we can at least make it, at their expense. And that's what kind of happens in our very specific racialized capitalist system. But that's why we see the environmental pollution, the environmental degradation. That's why Flint doesn't have water.
Yeah.
That's why Braddock in the Mon Valley has amongst the worst air quality in the nation. That's why when you look in some black and brown communities, you have refineries blowing up, and you have literal pollution dumping spaces right in people's backyards. Right in people's backyards, right? It's because those people don't matter.
Yeah.
It's because those people don't matter the same ways in which suburban, white, middle class, upper class, billionaire class folks do. The real way to solve this, if we're going to talk about solutions, the real way to solve this is to say that we need radical solidarity. Because the reality is that those poor black and brown communities, even their elected officials, the people who lead, too often they are forced to make choices that are not fair.
Right.
They do have to. I fight back against this narrative around whether we're going to have health or wealth. And we fight about that a lot, especially with some parts of labor, not all parts of labor community, but some. But the fact of the matter is that our communities have to make those decisions. Why? Right. Because you know what? In our area, the only tax base is that refinery, is that mill, is that foundry. And if we don't have that, not only are we losing those jobs, but our school district's gonna go under. And now we're disadvantaging another generation of kids, right? Those are the decisions that the people of these communities have to make. But you know who don't have to make those decisions? People who live in suburbs that are rich and affluent.
Yeah.
Those folks don't have to make those decisions. Can stop the system from forcing us to make those decisions. They can say, we're not going to be comfortable, we're not going to be okay with you building or drilling in that community anymore. We will no longer be comfortable, or we will no longer acquiesce to you treating that community, that black community, that indigenous community as a dumping ground. We are going to say that all of us are impacted by this, and we know that this will only stop when we say that we're going to put our money where our mouth is, we're going to put our activism, our allyship, where our mouth is, right? That's what solidarity looks like in the environmental movement. And that's how we're going to advance this, because we know that black and brown communities don't have the power to stop the environmental injustices happening in their community. They don't have the influences, they don't have the resources, they don't have the seats in government. They don't run development in these communities. They don't have what they need right now yet to stop it. But we could get it if other people gave up their disproportionate amount of power.
I think that's just such a mind-blowing point, because at the end of these shows, we really try to talk to people about solutions, how we can engage, how we can activate. And what I'm hearing is there are a lot of ways to do that. And you don't have to do all of them, but if you can find some way to engage in this dialogue and this co-governance, it's going to work better for everyone in the long run, because not only do these issues not exist in silos, but people don't exist in silos either. So for somebody that might be watching this and might be interested, or their ears perked up a little bit with some of the things that you'd have to say, what can they do in their own community, in their own space, to become activated if they're not perhaps ready to run for office like you did?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Because there's not one answer, right?
Yeah.
The answer is really as diverse as the folks who are looking for the answer. What is your thing? What's your passion?
Exactly.
What is...
What can you bring? What's your skill?
Your gifts.
Like,
Your
don't
gifts.
try and change yourself. Just
don't. And that's it, right?
Yeah.
Everybody is bringing something different. And that's so important, right? Because everybody's not going to be the elected. Everybody's not going to be the campaign manager. Everybody's not going to be the activist. Everybody won't be the organizer. Everybody can't be the pastor. Everybody can't be the plumber. Everybody contributes what they have, and that's how we build community. That's what community is. Community is literally just a collection of folks who are contributing in different ways at the exact spot where they are. And no one is even obligated to stay in the same spot, because you might find your entryway and it may not be the one that you want to stay at. You might start there and you may evolve into a different type of contribution, right? That's what's so beautiful about this. That's what's so cool about this, is that it's limitless possibilities. I started out wanting to organize, really because I wanted black and brown folks to see themselves reflected, right? Not that representation is going to save us, but not having representation is killing us. It's absolutely killing us. So if we are not the ones who are driving the conversation around environmental policy, around criminal justice, around policing, around economics, all of those things. When we're not driving that conversation is being driven by the people who are keeping us down, who are marginalizing us. So what I wanted to get in is I thought we could have more Black women running for office. And if we had more Black women, if we had more Black people, if we had more brown folks, if we had more poor people running for office, would their corresponding demographics be more likely to participate? If they saw somebody who looked like them and sounded like them and navigated society the way that they did, would they then be feel more comfortable? Would they feel more welcome? Would they feel more understanding? Would that help them to find themselves in the system? And I thought it would, right? That was my first contribution. And then I immediately had someone come to me and said, maybe you should run, right? My contribution changed, and it can. So your entryway, find your entry point. Is your passion art? We love art as activism. You know, art is a form of activism also. Yeah. Your art drives culture, which means that it drives revolution, which means it drives movements. If your contribution is legal expertise, then you can join legal services or whatever. If your contribution is talking, journalism, you're creating stories and you're sharing those stories. That's a part of movement. So all of these things are a part of movement. Find your space, find your community that's like-minded, and then grow it.
Oh, Summer. I could listen to you talk all day.
No, I'm actually feeling like emotional.
We're not eating.
I know but that's because the conversation is so.
It's like you're like spellbinding.
I know.
I'm listening and I'm like, wow.
No, we really appreciate you taking time to be with us on Heating Up, because I know everyone's busy, but you really are, and you're doing such important work in our communities, and we just wanted to give space to be able to have this conversation about why you decided to do what you see in the fork is like mesmerized by.
Trying to get
This is what happens when you're like, I'm trying to
Exactly.
eat, I'm also trying to be engaging.
No, you're doing it all right. You're doing it all great. But we really do appreciate you taking this time to share with us your perspectives and your value system on the things that matter to you. And thank you so much for being a part of Heating Up.
All right, Summer, anything you want to plug for the guests that are here with us before you go?
Of course. Yeah, you know what? If you are moved by any of this, if you're interested in environmental racism or criminal justice or ending police violence or racial capitalism, all those things, please follow Unite for PA. We're on Twitter, Unite for PA. I think that's our website. My own is also Summer for PA for Twitter. Always go to Summer for PA. If you think that there's fire here, there's more fire there. So Summer for PA.
I'm enjoying all the fire.
Yes, exactly. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you both. And thank you for the meal.
Oh, of course.
Did you like it?
I did. I'm trying to be healthier in my life. I'm failing, but I am trying to be.
I doubt you are, but bye guys.
Bye, you guys.
Thank you.